You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast, hosted by the founder of Better Beings, Michelle Zellner. Michelle's experiences have equipped her with knowledge and perspective, and for nearly 3 decades, she has been informing, influencing, and inspiring thousands on their journeys. This show spotlights guests of diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise, but they all align with Michelle's purpose and passion to help you be a better human being. There is something for everyone on their way to a healthier, happier life. Enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning into the Be a Better Being podcast. I am Michelle Zellner, your host, and I am really happy to be joined today by a guest who's going to talk on a super important topic. This is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and next week is the actual Suicide Prevention Awareness Week. And I have Jin Shin on the show with me to talk about that. So Jin, thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Michelle. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, to talk about this tough but super important topic.
It is a really hard topic, and I think it's one that does deserve a lot of attention. And so for anybody who's not comfortable hearing some really hard stuff, I just encourage you to hop on to a different episode of the show and come back in a week or so. But we are going to talk about the hard things because this is something that's not going away. In fact, I think the stats are showing that it's only getting worse. So before we dive into some of that, why don't you give the listeners just a little peek into your background? Who are you, and why is this an important topic to you?
Totally. Yeah. And before I do that, I just want to say thanks again for having me, Michelle. You have such fantastic conversations attacking the gray area. You have such rich questions talking about, everything from parenting all the way to just living in it yourself.
Thank you.
It is that honesty and authenticity you bring out of people that makes it such a fantastic listen. So you have a fan in me. It's an absolute honor to get to be here today. So yeah, I hope I can share some knowledge on this tough topic. And yes, if it is a tougher topic, come back for regularly scheduled programming and you'll continue to get that enrichment from this podcast. Yeah, so a bit about me. My calling in life, if you happen to believe in those, is to help prevent suicides. And I learned that the first time I was kind of brought that awareness when I was 15 years old. I had this phone call from my best friend at the time, and she said, "Hey, I'm in a situation that's like over my head. I don't know who to call. And so can you help me out?" And I picked up on the sense of urgency. And so I just said, yeah, like whatever we got to do. What do we got to do? And she said, "I've got somebody on the line who says she's going to take her own life. And she's definitely going to do it if they call the paramedics. And I convinced her to speak with you. So I just need you to take it." So at that point, I just kind of thought, all right, like anything to help you out and let's give it a shot. And so the stakes continue to rise because my friend tells me that this person is only going to take the call if I don't know who they are and they don't have to say anything. Okay, I understand the stakes and I take the call. So for 45 minutes that night, I spoke into the phone, just hearing the occasional sniffle and breathing. And I'll never forget 2 things from that night. The first thing is I understood the circumstances. I understood that I could say the wrong thing and what that could lead to. And the second thing is I remember just having an eerie sense of peace. Like I was supposed to be on that call and I wasn't going to lose this person. I'm happy to say that a week later, I did get to meet this person. And while we don't keep in touch today, she has graduated with a master's degree. And today is a mother of 2 and her story continues. I've just continue to have calls like that. And while I can't say I've won them all, what I have learned and what my heart just continued to be pulled towards is if you think about suicides as this sea, where a lot of water will pool out into, the sea has many inlets and ways, paths to it. And it is the network of streams of loneliness that I have learned to listen to and identify patterns in. So that's kind of what I'll be bringing to today's conversation when it comes to suicide prevention is loneliness, what a lot of people are pointing to as an epidemic, not just in the United States, but as an epidemic today. So yeah, that's the perspective I'll be trying to share as gently, but also as tactically and tangibly as possible. Yeah.
Well, I have to say 15 years old, that is a heavy phone call for anybody, much less a 15-year-old. Why did your friend reach out to you specifically? What about you at 15 years old did your friend think you had that could help this person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. It's a very easy answer. But she and I always had very deep conversations about identity, even from a young age. I remember thinking first, like conceptualizing death as a teenager and how terrified I was of that. Right. But after I kind of was able to understand it and then appreciate life as such a rare opportunity, that was all when I was like 13. And parents, if your kids ever tell you that they're wondering what time is, know that they're headed down a pretty dark and confusing path. And that's what I was curious about when I was a teenager. What caught my ear was, why is it that when I leave my home state of Oregon and maybe I see an Oregonian in a different state like New York, why does it become significant then and not when we are there together, right? And this concept of like our togetherness always stood out to me. And I think that, that just kind of made me prepared and feel comfortable in those conversations with big gray areas.
And just for context, how old are you now? Because you still look like 15.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, I get 15 to 45. Yeah, I'm 29 last time I checked.
So still very, very young, right? And yet to have that perspective and to have had those experiences already, it does sound like you were chosen to do this. So thank you for accepting that call, both figuratively and literally. As you have kind of been going through this now for almost 15 years, 15 to 29.
Right.
What are the connections? I mean, you mentioned loneliness. I know this sense of community. You grew up in, you're a millennial, young millennial, old Gen Z, right on the cusp?
Young millennial. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you grew up with technology, which I did not. So I am wondering, what role you think that plays in it. I'm just very curious about like all the dynamics and why you see this loneliness and this lack of community. And then how do we go about like coming back together?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I'm just like trying to bullet out a lot of things you just said because they're all so applicable. Technology is something that we're all trying to make get a better understanding of, like as the pace of it continues to rapidly advance, right? And so it's like, how do we ever feel like we have a grasp on it? I have seen that at the highest stages of C-suite, tech officers talking about how there are new technologies to adopt by the time you've implemented something. I have seen that in sober living homes, right? Where they feel more disconnected the more that they try to work on themselves because they feel more isolated than what they see in digital spaces, right? So my mind is kind of exploding right now, but sure, let's try to start at technology and then we'll look forward and we'll look back and then we'll see where else we can go with it. Yet today, I think what's tough about technology is just how it speeds us up, right? If we talk about mental health, I define mental health as your ability to be present. So present in your goals, in your surroundings, in your communities. And when you are scrolling social media, let's say you see 100 posts in 90 seconds, let's say 5 minutes, just to be generous, right? What you're really doing is, I like to say, like you're opening a lot of tabs in your mind. So I'm a entrepreneur today. My task manager tells me I have over 50 tabs open in one window. I'm just as guilty of this as the next person. But of those 50 tabs, right, there are not 40 of them that are helping me be more present, right? Like I'm opening tabs for myself and I'm not doing myself any favors, right? But when you take 5 minutes to start your day as a break or even to end your day, to just open tabs in your mind, that's just going to continue to add noise. Right? I don't know, maybe you're the one person who walks away from social media feeling grounded and refreshed. But if you're not, and you're like me, that is where social media can be really dangerous because then you start trying to resolve those tabs. So if we both see a meme that we really enjoy about, pancakes and waffles just being the same thing, then it makes me feel connected to Michelle. And I think that, Michelle's having a great life because I see all the things that she's liking. Maybe I should try buying things to make pancakes and waffles. And now I'm chasing what I call arbitrary tension that is not related to my presence in terms of my goals and surroundings and my meaningful tension, my personal tension in life, just, in pursuit of growth. I'm chasing arbitrary tension. Social media will mask that all under relevance. Because it's like, look, it's relevant to Michelle. It's relevant to all these people. That's a lot. And I hope that just helps illustrate how scatterbrained social media pulls us away from our present surroundings. I hope
I think that is, as somebody who didn't grow up with it.
Yeah.
I think, maybe my generation is much less impacted by it because I can look at something for what it is and walk away from it. I don't keep tabs open on anything.
Yes.
If I don't need it, I close
Yes.
it. I'm not somebody who's going to watch a movie and remember every single line. I half the time don't even remember that I saw the movie. I enjoyed it at the moment, and then I'm done. And I'm sure that's just part personality as well. But I think one thing that you really hit on there is how we are comparing ourselves to what others do or don't have, what they are or aren't doing. And for most people, that doesn't create a healthy narrative about ourselves.
Yes, definitely. That is so true. And the phrase that jumps to mind, quite popular one, is comparison is the thief of joy. It's so true. If you get something new that you really appreciate, the moment you see somebody has more of it, right? It almost decreases that initial appreciation. I think what social media does to make that even worse is it projects onto us this concept of normal, when normalcy is just a construct. Normal is different for me among my friends in Oregon, where I grew up, in Colorado, where I am now, in Massachusetts, where I went to college. So yeah, I like to say if comparison is the thief of joy, normalcy is the bait. So be careful as far as what it is that you are designating as normal, and then how you are reacting or responding to that.
Well, and I think at the root of all of this, we have to first have a foundation of what matters to each of us as individuals, right? And that, I think, develops over the course of time. What mattered to you at 15 is probably very different from what matters to you at 29.
Totally.
But if you've never sat down to actually articulate your goals and values, the things that are important,
yes,
then when you get an influx of all of these different ideas, you feel like they all have to be important and they all have to be your goals and they should all be everything, and you have to be all of them in order to be normal or to fit in or to have a sense of belonging, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious what your generation, and I know these are great grand sweeping generalities, but how much time is devoted to actually creating individuality based on what is important to you as an individual human?
Yeah. I haven't spent much time differentiating those patterns generationally. I have instead seen and identified the patterns that are very common. So I'll speak to that, and then maybe we can deconstruct that. There are stages of life that bring about larger questions of identity. And when you don't confront them or look inward, that can manifest into a existential crisis. So an existential crisis can, a very, very common ones that you may have heard of, include a midlife crisis or a quarter life crisis. And what an existential crisis is, very simply, is a recognition that you have not been spending your time in alignment with how you want. And that is why values are so important. Values are what you want in return for your time. It helps you think about time as a finite resource. So I'll go young to old, and then I'll go backwards, because I think it's very important to then speak to people that are going through those existential crises. But when you're young, it's all about having fun, really. You know, I heard you talk to people about how boys and girls mature at different ages, and at that elementary level, something that I always want to emphasize is the importance of fun, right? Because fun is the initial currency that we get to evaluate return for our time. So play is so important. Go play, go have fun. And then there will come a point in your life where fun will start to evolve into seeking fulfillment, right? So you'll notice that amongst your friends, right? Your friend group will change from interest-based friends like sports and activities to value-based friends, people that want to talk about the things you're curious about. So that'll kind of be your first sign. And then you'll want to spend your time, what we call working. You'll want to spend your time exploring that curiosity along with your values. And so that's kind of the young to old route. But then when you do hit those existential crises, I also want to say, like, don't be afraid to just go play. You know, when I see somebody going through an existential crisis, like a midlife crisis, and they do a complete wardrobe change, I love that. You know, I think I always encourage that, because it's like, you're getting back to that play of just let me just reevaluate my values and look at life through a set of lenses that are freeing me of my inhibitions and the patterns that I have built around myself. So yeah, I don't know, whenever I see people like going through those crises and they present very differently, I think that's always exciting and something to root for. I don't remember what the question was. Michelle, how did I get here? I'm lost.
I think just talking generationally about how do we establish values and gain our own sense of unique individual identity so that when we are bombarded by the influx of all the things that we're supposed to care about,
yes,
we can actually decide if we're going to spend time caring about it or not.
Yeah. And I hope that was helpful. I think what makes us different as individuals is our nature versus nurture. And then what makes us different generationally is our nurture, right? How we're nurtured. Something I talk about a lot within mental health is this concept of leisure. Leisure didn't come around until the 1900s, like as a word, right? So our relationship with leisure is different at every generation with our access to technology. And that's where it's so hard to even parent. I'm not a parent, but I speak with parents and I can understand that as new convenience comes into your life, like fast food, for example, it's hard not to treat convenience as a destination, right? It's like, okay, 2-day shipping, that's something I've just gotten used to. But convenience should really be looked at as like an advantage and not a destination. If convenience is a destination, that's where we start to then pass that down generationally and say, yeah, just speed of access was like short-term gain. It's so accessible. So don't worry about delayed gratification, right? Like that's kind of what we end up teaching to the next generation if we are not aware of how convenience is changing our lives. So yeah, I think that's where like the generational differences lie and often show up is how are we introducing convenience into leisure? And if we are not really aware about that, we start to see, generational patterns develop.
Well, and I think that brings up another interesting point of conversation is, I think I have this with somebody else just on the podcast, that we tend to not value things that we don't work for.
Yes.
So when everything is instant gratification, instant result, instant answer, convenience, then what do I have to be proud of, right?
Yeah.
What kind of pride do I have? And a human on a core level, in order to thrive, needs to have a sense of pride.
Yes.
A sense of accomplishment, a sense of I've overcome something. So if everything is just given to me or it comes easily or I can access it very, very rapidly and quickly with relatively no effort, then when I maybe am in a place in life where I'm not getting what I want, that's probably going to lead to some kind of existential crisis, right? And I don't now have the tools or skills to problem solve my way out of it because I've just always been given the answer or had this instant result. And that's where we might tend to feel lost and tend to feel like the world is ending and, and then all of these things, right? And so, I mean, there are so many contributing factors. Obviously, there is no easy answer to why someone might be contemplating taking their own life.
Totally.
Everybody's story is different.
Yes.
And so I think it's about understanding all of the contributing factors that may or may not exist for any one person, which is what makes this incredibly daunting because there's billions of people on the planet. And how can I know what any one of them is maybe, experiencing or finds to be a struggle when that same thing is not a struggle for somebody else? So think about just in your own experience with all of the people that you've been on the other end of the phone with. Were there any really common threads that you could identify?
Yes, definitely. And that's where loneliness became so apparent. I found that it's never sudden. Suicidality is never sudden. There's this gradual sliding down into it, if you will. And that is when we are processing our mental health in a very healthy way. I like to say that what we do informs who we are and who we are inspires what we do. So take, for example, I eat, do, and now I am tired. I am tired, right? So it's a feeling, but that's who I am. That's part of my identity. If I am tired, that inspires me to go sleep. In its simplest form, like we don't even have to think about it. It's just happening. But then life gets more complicated, right? And we experience things for the first time that we don't know how to process into I am statements, right? It's in that gap of I don't know how to process this information into who I am that then people can make this jump. And that jump is I can't find anyone that has gone through what I have been through, and it hurts. And as the old adage says, time heals all wounds. So I am going to cover this up. I'm going to deal with this wound myself. Unfortunately, when people do that, they jump out of that process of their own like identity and mental health and into isolation. And that jump is the loneliness jump, is what I call it. It is the idea that an event and its underlying feelings have made you disqualified as a person. Right? And the underlying feelings are so important because they are the evidence that support the claim. You know, a lot of guys will be like, it's not about how I feel. Well, when you say no one understands what I've been through, that means that you have feelings that you have not been able to find commonality in. That is then supporting your claim of nobody understands you. Right? So then you're in that very scary place of isolation. And then isolation steps down into shame. And then shame is a very dangerous place. But I want to just kind of take a minute, pause, and extrapolate on these two ideas, because I actually think isolation is the most dangerous spot you can be. In isolation, we often tell ourselves, the common refrain is, I've got everything under control. How I'm not healing, how I am coping, how I am using drugs and alcohol, my substances, I've got it under control. My escapism, pornography, social media, video games, I've got everything under control. Why this is such a dangerous spot, though, is because the line between isolation and shame is not only different for everybody, but it's completely imperceivable. Right? All it takes is to one day wake up and say, I don't like the way that I'm healing, to then shift into shame and say, I don't like who I am. I'm not worthy of love. Doing what's best for me is out of the question. I can't ask for help. And in this shame spot where it gets really scary is when people say, I can't ask for help. I'm not worthy of love. So I should actually punish myself. This is like that kind of how this funnels down into suicidality, is that self-punishment, and then starts to beat down your voice of self-worth. That turns into a really, really vicious cycle. So yeah, when you are in that space, that's what I have found, is when you are in that space, you're like just devoid of hope. This concept of hope is like impossible to think about. So yeah, that's kind of what I have identified as those patterns that can like step you down into a really scary place.
Well, and I think the connection to self-medicating or, avoiding the feelings, right? That's almost always a piece of the puzzle. Rarely is there, at least in my experience, somebody who has taken their own life that didn't also have some connection to addiction in some way.
Interesting.
And so that connection to addiction really, blurs the mind even more, obviously, right? You can't even make any kind of logical, rational conversation with yourself when your mind is completely altered because of some substance or the addiction to whatever it is. And so that just adds another layer of challenge of getting through the hump, right?
Yes.
And when I've had people talk about addiction a lot. Sasha, obviously 10 years sober now, which is amazing. But generally you turn to something because you don't like the way you're feeling, right?
Yes.
And we have so many easy, socially acceptable ways to escape the way that we're feeling.
Yes, right.
And I think all of that, again, adds to the difficulty and adds to maybe even the challenge of somebody identifying some warning signs in somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, they're just the fun person. They're the party person. They're, they always have the happy face on, the whole wearing the mask, the fake it till you make it, all of these things.
Yeah, totally.
Which are not always, but very often are just ways to cover up what you don't want the world to see.
Yes. Yes. And I will defend that person first by saying the world doesn't need to see, your wounds. It just doesn't, which is, oh my gosh, I could go on a rant on social media about, how then it wants us to present our highlights, but I'm not going to go there. There's a limited amount of time we have to talk. Yeah, that's where like coping mechanisms become this double-sided sword. Sometimes it's a survival skill, which is true. And sometimes it's making it so that you're not starting your healing process. And if I may, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what that healing process looks like.
Yes, please.
Through this very, very scary word called vulnerability. Before I break that down, I want to talk about another pattern that I have recognized in mental health: men versus women. And what I have found is men, we are still very much in this state of, if I have feelings, I am weak. This is a quote from a car mechanic friend of mine who was talking about what the mental health culture is amongst his work friends. Right. And so this is a direct quote. And he said to me, if I talk about my feelings, I am a fucking pussy. Right? And that is common amongst men, especially in work culture. Yeah, that's just true. If you look at suicide statistics for certain work groups, the highest ones every year are mining industry and the construction industry. By a long shot, it's not close. And those are very male dominant spaces. Right. So that's where we're at with men. And then where we're at with women is this fear of oversharing. Right? There's this fear of, I know I can talk about how I am with people, but I don't want to be a burden on others. That gap between men and women is massive. Right? Women are working with the emotional, intellectual capacity of being like overthinking it to a point where it's like, what am I allowed to share? And then men are also saying, from a very different place, what am I allowed to share? And when I realized that, I saw, oh, there is common ground here. And we need to figure out how to talk about what I am allowed to share. And that's where vulnerability comes in. I love etymology, right, which is the study of words, how they form and evolve over time. One day I looked up the word vulnerability, and I found that it comes from the Latin root vulnus, vulnus, and vulnus directly translates to wound. So when I replaced vulner with wound, I instead saw our ability to share our wounds. Now, I did just say that the world does not need to see our wounds, but it's so important to share our wounds so that we learn how to heal, right? How can I come back from a torn ACL if I've never torn an ACL? Do I just hide that? No. Whatever happens to us emotionally, traumatic experiences to like fresh rejection that I don't understand, why would I do that to myself? What is important with vulnerability and what takes real courage is finding people who can help you understand it. And that's terrifying because those are often the people whose judgment you're most afraid of because they've been through it. So they might be able to call you weak. And that if they call you weak, right, that's terrifying. But that is a falsehood. People who have been through what you've been through are like way more often so understanding and generous with helping you understand it than we make it out to be. We just kind of have to take that leap of faith and have that courage to say, okay, for me to get out of shame, for me to get out of isolation, I have to find people that have been through what I've been through. Right? So even in that physical health example, if I tear an ACL, sure, I can Google it. I can understand that like I'm going to need surgery and I'm going to need an orthopedic surgeon. But that's not where I would start, right? I would start by asking friends that I have that I know have torn their ACLs to help me understand what is it like to live with it? What is it like to live post-surgery? If I can understand it, then I can conquer it, right? I don't want to be just hung out to dry after I've had surgery and then also recover on my own. Right? It's about being together. It's about finding commonality, not normalcy. Commonality is so healing. It's like just this wave of comfort and relief that gives you real, legitimate hope. Legitimate hope. Right? I want to double down on that because if you are in that place of despair, of shame, of loneliness, of isolation, like finding people, and I know how hard that is. That is why I'm calling that such a great act of courage. But finding like-minded people, people that have been through what you're going through, you will feel real hope when you can open up to those people.
Well, and I think the relatability piece is really helpful. I also have heard the term trauma bonding.
Yeah.
And many will say that that is not a healthy relationship to, form a relationship based on bonding with our traumas.
Yes.
So how do we navigate those two paths, right? I personally don't think you always have to share with somebody who's been through what you've been through. Honestly, most people share things with me that I've never been through.
Yes.
And I'm really grateful I've never been through them. But
Yes.
they seem to be willing to share that with me anyway. So I think what's important is that you share with someone.
Yes.
right? It's that you share with someone, whoever that is,
Totally.
whoever you feel most comfortable sharing with.
Yep.
What we can't do is just keep it in.
Totally.
And to your friend, the car mechanic, right? Like, who's he sharing with?
Right.
Nobody, because he will be judged as a fucking pussy.
Yeah.
Right? And that is unfortunate that there are still people, and there will forever be people, forever, that will never change. There will always be people who have that mentality.
Yeah.
I think because we're having these conversations, we're getting to see maybe fewer and fewer people who have that mentality. And that's the goal, right? To just keep this conversation going.
Yeah.
But it does take your car mechanic friend to say, you know what, then if that's what you're going to think of me, that's what you're going to think of me, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. So true. So true. And that's that courage. That is that courage. I'm going to do it anyway because I know I want to work on this for me, and I want to heal, and I want to grow. So yeah, if I can just double back on trauma bonding, a very, very real thing. I think trauma bonding, if we can just kind of split hairs here, is this space where both people have connected on a topic for the first time. And so we actually don't have any other perspective other than the same. And that's where trauma bonding can be really, really dangerous, because now what you know is everything. Like, it's become everything you know about it. So yeah, definitely be careful. Sharing with like-minded people, I think is great, and I encourage it. I really do. But if it sounds like you're talking to yourself and that's the only perspective you're getting, I'm going to give you another push to try to find others. Yeah.
And like we said, this topic is so complex, right?
Yes.
It's understanding yourself. I think also understanding that nothing is permanent.
Yes.
Except taking your life.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's in that moment of decision that maybe you don't realize that this is permanent.
Yeah.
And think about how that's going to feel.
Yes.
Right? Think about, is that really the answer? Most likely you're going to come up with the word, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's being okay, being uncomfortable, right? You're going to experience pain in life.
Yeah.
Physical, mental, emotional.
Yeah.
Life is painful.
Totally.
Life is hard.
Yes.
Life is pain, but you know what? Billions of people have gone through it.
Yeah.
And you can go through hard things too.
Yes.
It's recognizing and maybe seeing in your friends and people around you who are struggling, how to give support to somebody who's struggling.
Yes.
So you've had a lot of experience with this. So how can maybe a friend, a parent, a sibling offer support? What can that look like?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I have two answers. One, I want to speak to that person just directly, in case they're listening. And then second, I'll speak to the support. To the person, if you may be listening, that is just, can't think of the last time they had a meaningful win, right? Through my time listening to people in their individual stories, I have learned this perspective where I look at life like one big house. And in this house, everybody gets one room. It's the same size room because we all get 24 hours in a day. And I love to get to see the passions littered on the floor, the accomplishments on the shrines. The most beautiful thing is the pictures on the walls. What I've noticed about the pictures on the walls is that they are not the times in life that they were happiest. They're the times in life where they were life-defining moments, right? Of heartache, of heartbreak, of people lost, of, sure, milestones too. And what I've learned through that is this conversation that always comes up is when I speak to people who have broken that tension in life, I can ask them, hey, before you went down a dark path for yourself, if you got to know what you figured out for yourself, if you found out the solution at the start, would you have told yourself? Would you have liked to have known? And the answer is always no, because what I went through made me who I am. Hardship, yes, is part of the experience, but what I want to try to reframe is life, I don't believe, is about happiness. It's about the moments that make us say, aha, that's why I went through what I went through. happiness can be found. You can convince yourself of happiness. You can feel loved in a moment, but the relief, that wave of relief of truly like being able to gain wisdom and have wisdom can only be experienced by continuing to face the tension in your life and saying to yourself, I'm 100% capable of figuring this out for me, which I believe with my whole heart. As a friend, what I always suggest to people is to try to ask people about how they've been and not just what they've done. Right. So if a friend of yours is starting to just only share about things they've done, meals they've had, trips they've been on, without actually talking about how it's impacted their identity, or why was it different this time, right? Or who was there that made it special. If they're only talking about life in terms of, I did it, I did it, I did it, that's a good sign that their mind is starting to be a bit more reductive and their mental health is starting to narrow into searching for that win through actions. So I like to encourage people to ask, like, hey, how have you been? What's it been like to be present? How, like, has it been hard to be present lately? And if you want to dare to dive so far to take more accountability, you could even ask a question like, what can I do to help you trust me more? And that is how you can start to break down those walls of here's what I've done and here's what I'm presenting to the world into, hey, who are you in your day-to-day life?
That's great. Everybody needs a friend like Jin who's going to push people to have deeper level conversations. I think even with close friends, right? We have very superficial. We like to just stay surface because deep stuff is heavy and hard, and we just want to be fun and be light and all the things.
Yeah.
And yet, what you really understand somebody when you ask hard questions and when they're willing to open up and give honest answers. But if you don't have anybody in your life who will ask those hard questions, you'll never probably volunteer it.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I would say if you have people in your life that are willing to go a little deep, explore that. Those conversations, like you said, you were having these conversations at a young age, 13, 14, 15.
Yeah.
I would say most people are worried about, what clothes they're going to wear, what's the latest game they're going to play, what's their Instagram story, whatever. So I think be a better being means being uncomfortable, getting out of your comfort zone, choosing to grow. And sometimes that means even that inner growth of digging into something that might be even hard for you to articulate, because if you've never explored it or talked about it, you might not even have the words. And some people have a really hard time talking about hard things. And, that's okay too. And yet knowing that if and when they are ready to talk about hard things, that they have someone they can talk about it with, I think is also really important in everybody's social circle to recognize that. Before we officially wrap this up, two things. One, I want to make sure we highlight for the listeners 988. That is the suicide prevention hotline. 988, very simple. This is a number for anybody, whether you have somebody in your life that you're concerned about and you don't know what to do, you call 988, they can guide you through some things. Or maybe you are somebody who's struggling and you don't want to talk to a friend and you don't want to talk to a therapist and you don't want to go through all the rigmarole. 988, very simple. It's just like Jin did for his friend. It's an anonymous person on the other end. They don't know you. They don't know anything about you. It's just there to give you that time to talk and hopefully, find a next step. So before we officially close out, Jin, anything that we haven't covered that you think is important for the listeners?
No, that the one thought that jumped into my mind. So nothing that I had maybe it was something that I just wanted to touch on, but nothing that I really had prepared, was this concept of being a better being is truly perfect for this week. Just, gosh, what makes me sad about this super fast 24-hour social media news cycle is how we are defining ourselves more and more based on our productivity and what we've done. But topics we've talked about today, like commonality, vulnerability, astonishing moments, this is all my own research around what it is to just be a being, not a human doing, right? Something you may have heard before. So yeah, it's just so fitting to get to have this conversation with you, Michelle, on this fantastic podcast. So just thanks. And yeah, I hope that this was able to reach somebody and spark a conversation with a friend also along the way.
No, this was great. Thank you. Thank you for being that person on the other end of the phone for so many people. And we'll put all the ways to connect with you in the show notes so people can reach out and get some guidance from you if they feel like they're in a position for that. And everybody listening, I know it was a hard, heavy conversation. I know there's a lot of gems in this one. So get yourself in a good headspace and listen to it again, take your notes, and then do something about it, right? That's what you get to do. You get to go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. We hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.